Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on cybersecurity in the healthcare field. We're going to talk about optimizing costs and staffing. A lot of talk around this topic, and we're going to get started right here. I just want to ask anybody who has any questions, please use the Q&A box on your screen. We expect this to be an interactive webinar with our panelists, but also with our attendees. So if anybody has any questions, type them in. We'll get to them either real time or we'll get to them during the Q&A session. Thanks a lot, and I'd like to turn this over now to Steve Racing, President and CEO of ASMGI. Take it away, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks to all the attendees for sharing your time with us today. And thanks to the panelists. We have a great expert panel today, so I'm really excited about that. The topic for the day is optimizing cybersecurity in a healthcare setting. It's the balance of getting enough resources and managing risk it's really challenging, and it's something that we're going to address head on today. So thank you, panel, for being here. And we have a great panel today. Kevin Tabascio, Director of Cybersecurity from Cleveland Clinic, and also the President of Northeastern Ohio section of HIMSS. So thanks, Kevin, for being here. We also have Stephen Jacobs from the Associate VP of Technology of Healthcare for Gas Technology, and Kanan is the head of cybersecurity for Gas Technology. Thank you guys for being with us today. Why don't you take a second and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your company and the things that you do. Go ahead, Kevin.
Sure. My name is Kevin Tomasio, Director of Cybersecurity Data and Application Protection at Cleveland Clinic. My team is responsible for protecting the organization's data, whether it be structured, unstructured data, living in the cloud, living on our premise data centers, as well as our applications that are used in delivering patient care and operating our organization. I've been with the Cleveland Clinic for about 5 years. Previously was managing our red team and also had a role in medical device cybersecurity. Prior to the clinic, I was at a local firm specializing in industrial control. And so I have an industrial control system background, and then moved into healthcare about 5 years ago.
Cool. It wasn't just any company, it was Rockwell. So it was a great company. Yeah. Cool. Go ahead, Stephen.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Jacobs. I just recently joined Gas Technologies back in June to start up the intelligent automation practice. So I've been in that area for a little over 17 years. So I was with Pega before that. And before formally joining Pega, I was with a company called OpenSpan that was acquired by Pega for our robotics product. So I've been in the automation space for a long time. I've seen how both attended and unattended could help a lot of different verticals in a lot of different areas. And so I'm very interested today to talk to you about how bots can help enhance your cybersecurity.
Awesome. Kanan, go ahead. You're muted.
Hi all, this is Kanan Srinivasan. Come with over 23 years of experience. I'm with GAVS for a little bit over 2 years, responsible for the internal security and the cybersecurity services. We are supporting multiple healthcare clients, taking care of their end-to-end cybersecurity requirements. 20 years, I was with Cognizant. That's where I played multiple leadership role there, including a risk officer, managing 32,000 plus associates. That's about myself.
Awesome. Thanks. And I'm Steve Racing, President and CEO of ASMGI. We're a full stack technology company. So we get involved in everything technology, basically, and with an affinity for cybersecurity, for sure. So what are we going to talk about? So our agenda for the day, we'll do some introductions. We pretty much already did them, right? A little bit of a session overview, and then we'll go into some background about cybersecurity and healthcare space, and then some questions for the panelists. And this is the real interactive session. So if you have questions in the audience, please, like Paul said, ask them through the Q&A box. Then we're going to have a time period at the end of the session specific to audience questions. And so we'll go through any questions that come in, or we'll answer them real time, and we'll do closing remarks. We'll have an opportunity to do some closing remarks. So without further ado, I'll just talk about healthcare cybersecurity in general. So some things that I think are real interesting about healthcare, like everybody, it's no mystery that healthcare is a target, right? And part of the reason is because medical records are worth so much, right? So the way it's summed up, I think that it makes the most sense is that, like a credit card, you just call the credit card company and the fraud department, and you just say, hey, I need a new card, and they just cancel it and give you a new card right there, so you get a new number and all those things. Healthcare records, you can't change, right? They're with you forever. And 90%, more than 90%, so 9 out of 10 health breaches, large data breaches, were healthcare or 90% of healthcare organizations have experienced a breach. 30% of all of the large scale data breaches have been healthcare companies. 34% of healthcare data breaches come from unauthorized access, right, to various different things. 88%, so almost 90% of healthcare workers click on phishing emails, right? And so we all know that phishing emails are getting a lot smarter. They used to be like written in broken English and various different things. It was pretty easy to identify when you had a phishing email. People are still clicking on links though. But today, they're really convincing, and people are clicking on those links. So I think it's worth noting that 6 common types of security breaches in healthcare. One is phishing, clearly, and just a little story. Like I've been at a lot of meetings at healthcare companies, and the cyber team, they always bring their laptops to the meeting, and they're always saying, "Oh, that person, somebody just clicked on a link in an email." It happens that fast. And with companies that have like 100,000 employees, like Cleveland Clinic, right, it can happen incredibly fast. There are a lot of people to keep track of and make sure that they're doing the right thing. Malware, number 2. Number 3, ransomware. Number 4, theft of patient data. Number 5, insider threats. Number 6, hacked IoT devices. So I think this goes right into your realm of expertise, Kevin and Stephen, it sounds like, and probably Kanan as well, right? So anyway, philosophically, I think IoT devices are going to move up the food chain a little bit. Like there's, from an attack surface perspective, we're going to see more attacks as a result of IoT devices. And I'll get to that in a minute, but anyway, that's an opinion. That's my opinion. Anywho, so in support of that, the cybersecurity market, total market in the world is like $16.5 billion, with a valuation, a market value of $92 billion. The compounded annual growth rate of 18.5%, it's huge, right? So it's going to grow. It's going to grow a lot. Medical devices. I just want to talk about the proliferation of devices, right? So there's a lot of regulation. In fact, we have a webinar next week with the FDA about the regulations. But the FDA wrote some guidance around cybersecurity and just are starting to enforce it. Like October 1st, they're going to enforce it, right? So pre-approvals, the 510K forms that the FDA has been giving pre-approvals in the past, they're instructed not to give pre-approvals, right? So unless a device can demonstrate, can prove that it's secure. And I think it's a good program from that perspective. So, but 1.5 or 159 million, so almost 160 million in North America in 2017, right? So we're now in 2023, 5 years later, 6 years later. It's a lot more than that. That number is a lot more than that. So 75 billion IoT devices around the world total in all industries, right? Not just in healthcare, but 75 billion. 51 billion now, 75 billion in 2 years, right? It's that's a lot, man. That's a big jump. So anyway, I like this slide because it demonstrates the challenge with IoT devices, right? There are a lot of benefits. There's that's clear, but the developers who are rushing IoT products that are not properly secured, 85% of them, right? If you think about the number of devices, 75 billion devices by 2025 around the world, 85% of those are not secure. No wonder the FDA or regulations are imposing requirements around cybersecurity, right? Companies that will not benefit from IoT from lack of data science, data scientists internally. IoT products on the market that are vulnerable to attacks, 70%. 7 out of 10 devices that are launched are vulnerable. That's huge, man. So the trade-off and the balance is because 25% savings. Healthcare, as we know, is pretty hurting in 2023, right? This is a year that I'll say most, if not all, healthcare companies are seeing less revenues. So operating margins are shrinking or negative already, and it's phenomenal. You know, the amount of stress on healthcare companies, I'll say, but 25%, that's the predicted savings if you implement an IoT device, right? But the balance is, the trade-off is, if you implement an IoT device, there's a chance that you're implementing risks along with it, right? And so, you know, how do you work that balance? And that's what really this webinar is all about, and we're going to get to the crux of it. So I'll start with some panelist questions. What does the threat landscape look like in healthcare? Kevin, I think it would be appropriate to start with you.
Sure. So like you mentioned, phishing is going to be the top way that we, healthcare organizations see attacks. The easiest way typically to come in is going to be through people and trying to trick them, whether it's through mass emails, whether it's targeted spear phishing. There's a number of well-known campaigns and threat actors out there who continue to deploy those types of tactics and techniques against healthcare organizations. Once they've been able to, steal credentials or gain that initial access, that's when they're going to look toward, malware and things to introduce those into the organization, so they can start to, look around and like you mentioned, they're looking for data. Our healthcare data is the most, valuable asset that we have. And so for any healthcare organization, those are your crown jewels. Those are the things that the attackers are looking for. And again, typically they're going to look for, phishing and those types of avenues. But you also have to, be considerate of third parties. I mean, any healthcare organization has a vast array of third parties that are part of our operations, that are part, suppliers and things. Many of those third parties have access to a healthcare network. So, it's not just your own people and your own perimeter in that sense. You also have to be looking at who have you granted access, who have you allowed as a third party, and how secure are they? Because if they can't get in through directly to our organization, they can often look to a third party, try to infiltrate, and then try to find their way into the organization. Another area of concern too is application security. So looking at systems on the perimeter, websites, mobile apps, things like that. Every application, every website, every port you have exposed in an organization, it expands your attack surface and gives the ability for someone to kind of look at that as an opportunity to try to get in. So many healthcare organizations see attacks on applications, whether it's homegrown applications or like the recent Citrix vulnerability, as another, opportunity, to come into the organization. So vast array of threat actors. It still is the leading target of these operatives. And they're after the health records due to the value and the content that brings for their operations.
Awesome. Anything to add to that, Stephen?
That was a great description. I will say, and it's funny, we're going to be picking on the employees all day, right? And it's not, not for any other reason than that's just the main entry point for most breaches, right? Is the user. And the people are the most valuable resource in a company, but it's also the place where most of these attacks actually get entry, right? So, in thinking about, going back to phishing, how do we handle that? How do we look at that, and how do we be more proactive on it? We've all seen the programs. We all go through the trainings every year to renew on our certifications to make sure that we know about the phishing, the spoofing, all the things that are happening there when they try to target us. But we can also go beyond that as well. And in looking at this from an intelligent automation standpoint, there's things that you can do with that to ensure that, if they go to click on a link, you can check to make sure that it's a valid link versus something that could be malicious, and you could actually stop that as opposed to allowing it to continue. The bots are very advanced nowadays in what they can do. So it's not just around, making sure that we're educated in the techniques and what we're doing, but we can actually use software to be proactive to help fix some of these threats also.
Got it. How about you, Kanan?
Yeah, so a couple of so well said, Kevin and Stephen, right? In addition to what we just mentioned, I would like to add a couple of additional things, and they are number one, it's the supply chain, right? So who are the third-party vendors who have access to your systems, and do they have adequate security processes in place to safeguard your environment, right? Today, it's really hard to say, if any organization can do all their activities in-house, they have to depend on third party. So if they don't, you can put 100 controls to safeguard your environment, but if they don't have similar controls, then definitely that leads to a lot of issues, is what I've seen personally. And
how do you ensure that they have the proper controls in place?
Sorry, and that can be
that they have the proper controls.
Regular audits. Right? How do we, conduct third-party security audits and making sure, they have the controls, asking for a SOC 2 report. So those are some of the aspects, that we look for. And next thing, and there's also, something new, is the ChatGPT, right? So really, you can, if you don't have adequate security controls in place, this can lead to exposing your company's data to an external parties. As you know, ChatGPT can also crawl your websites, and if like Kevin mentioned, if you don't have adequate security control in your application, it can lead to exposing your the sensitive PHI and PII data, and that can lead to a lot of incidents.
Cool. Third-party risk management program. That's the way that you would ensure that third parties have the adequate controls in place, right? Is have a third-party risk program. So I think it's critically important for enterprises to have third-party risk programs, for sure, and robust ones at that. But you bring up an interesting point in the supply chain attack, and that a lot of times is where software attacks happen, right? So I was like an SCA scan, a component analysis scan, or a dependency scan, or whatever. But you flush out all the objects and that's why the concept of a software bill of materials or an SBOM really came from is, creating a list of objects that are embedded in your software, and a lot of them have libraries and or vulnerabilities. So that's a very good point. How about compliance and regulatory in healthcare? We'll go in the reverse order this time. So Kanan, why don't you start? How about compliance and regulatory and compliance issues?
One thing, the healthcare they have to adhere to is the HIPAA or the high-tech requirements. In addition to it, there are multiple, the compliance requirements, right? Be it CHIP, that is Children's Health Insurance Program, or Hospital Readiness Reduction Program. So there are multiple compliance requirements that they have to take care of. Plus, if you have to also touch upon the standards, some of the right, are you using the secured standard, like for example HL7 and those kind of aspects, or something that you have to prove that you're able to meet the regulatory requirements. So in my view, these are the key things that we need to take care of.
Yep. Stephen, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, and so, going beyond a little bit from the technology, when you look at compliance and governance, oftentimes it can be handled at the process level as well, right? So implementing guardrails to make sure that a process is completed correctly without, the potential for breaches. So, for example, as opposed to having an individual complete a task, if an end-to-end robot can be put in place, then you can ensure that, access doesn't even have to be granted to applications. That the information is going to be sent to the correct area, whether that's an email or to a site where something's being published. So you can take and you can protect the applications and the sensitive, valuable data inside of those by, adding that framework of automation around it as well. So, shifting from the other systems, taking it to the process level, you can have protections on both sides there.
Cool. Yeah, I think there are a ton of applications for automation in healthcare, use cases for automation.
Absolutely.
So,
it's not just enough for you to prove that you're compliant once, right? What we really have to focus on is the continuous monitoring. So that can be achieved only using automation, Steve.
Got it. Kevin, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, demonstrating compliance in today's regulatory landscape is certainly a challenge at the size and scale that we operate on. Demonstrating compliance to requirements, takes lots of people, lots of time, processes, things like that in order to, come up with the data to support, where we are. We work really hard every year on certain, compliance assessments and things, to provide that information and gather the details. So definitely, some areas for automation to, potentially help with that. We also operate in a global sense at Cleveland Clinic. We have operations in London, and so they have, GDPR and other types of regulatory actions that are maybe a little bit different from the United States. We also have an operation in Canada, which is kind of increasingly differentiating itself. And so being aware of those regulations, there's a number of US states that are looking at regulatory regulations in the privacy space. So think like GDPR type things that are being brought upon by states like Colorado and California, which is just kind of, when you add that all up together, making for a more complex environment that we have to operate in and at times demonstrate compliance to. So it is very challenging in those ways. And then certainly our medical device vendors are seeing, the changes in the FDA, the changes, from the Biden administration and some of the transparency and things about what's in these products. So there's a lot happening in this space. And it's, I think, challenging for both hospitals and medical device providers and healthcare vendors, helping healthcare to, stay fresh in all of the changes that are happening, and keep making sure that we're ahead of those changes, because it's getting, more complex by the day.
Agreed. Agreed. What I would add to that is, like, take care of compliance first, right? Because they usually, if you don't comply, you'll get a fine, right? So it's going to cost real dollars, real money. So comply, and regulations are just, going ballistic. I think one of the webinars we've done before, Kevin, was on Executive Order 14028. That was a big one, but it affected healthcare industry and hospitals specifically, right? So it's a lot of a lot of stuff that you have to stay up on. So how do you balance budget and security in healthcare? Stephen, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, so in terms of budget, everyone's being constrained, right? We know that we're in a bit of a situation economically here in the States. We may be in for a rough Q4. All companies, regardless of any time, are always trying to do more with less, right? So when you start looking at what are we going to do with the dollars that we have allocated and how are we going to work through this, one of the things, not just around security, but just in general, when you start looking at bots, that's what we're trying to do, is to allow the current user base or the current resources to be able to do more, or to focus their energies on high value areas as opposed to doing redundant work. So if there are reports that have to be ran, if there are tests that have to be executed for monitoring those things, then that's where you can leverage these bots to free up your resources to work on those higher value tasks, since you're paying them for that. And then that way, if there are spikes or peaks, then the bots can handle those as well, so you don't have to ramp up staff also. So it's a good way to mitigate the need for additional staff and to really use the budget effectively that you're working with.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome input. Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I think sitting in the position that we sit in the organization, I often, I think we feel a grave or a big responsibility, with the trust the organization has in us, with the dollars that are given to us. I always think about every dollar that I get, as a budget owner, is a dollar that's not being spent on our patients and their care, right? So how do we make good decisions, right? It really comes down to having a risk-based approach to make sure that we are spending dollars in the most appropriate areas and receiving the value from those dollars. So the tools we buy, the people we hire, the services we procure, the products we buy, are they really solving the problem? Are they really adding value? Are they really making, our organization better at the end of the day? Because we have the trust of the organization, and they've given us these resources, to protect them. So in terms of how do you balance that, I think, being smart about how you operate, looking at, how can you, improve efficiencies wherever we go? How can we employ automation and other things to try and help control costs? Making sure, we work with our vendors to have predictable pricing, so that we can kind of control the future spend in different areas. But most importantly, just making sure we're getting value, we're spending the dollars wisely, we're applying it to our most important risks, and doing the best we can to make good decisions. So that's how I look at, balancing the budget against security.
Awesome. Yeah, good input. How about you, Kanan?
Yeah. So see, typically when it comes to the any healthcare industry, right? I mean, the security spend is somewhere around like 6 to 7%, while the banking and others are 8 to 10 in that range, right? Clearly, the spend on security is is less when in healthcare. So here are some of the things like that we can really focus on. Number one, adopting cloud, right? I mean, moving from the capex to the opex model, but at the same time, improving the security in the cloud. And second thing is improving, moving from taking care of everything in-house. Can we leverage something like a managed security service provider model? While and also like doing some kind of an architecture change, like bring in zero trust model and those kind of aspects, which is number one, like it'll improve your security posture, and at the same time, over the period of time, it will also reduce or bring in more efficiency in the way we do things. While we do all this, right, some of the key things that we need to focus on is there is no way you should cut your budget on the security awareness training. You should not cut your investment, especially when it comes to incident response planning, resiliency, and on the cyber insurance servers. So these, at least like these four areas, I know budget is a big constraint, but you just can't avoid, or you should not ignore these four key areas, like because if you don't do it right, it'll definitely have a major impact on the any healthcare organization.
Yep. It's challenging, I think, to navigate through this this time. And I have a metaphor. I say a lot, like, if you give me $1, I'll give you $2, and that's like 100% return, right? So if you give me $5, I'll give you 10. That's still 100.
Steve, we lost audio.
I don't have audio, or you don't have audio?
You're back now.
Okay.
Well, that's
Good.
strange.
We can hear you.
But in any event, I don't know how much you heard or how much you didn't hear, but I did a lot of talking. I should just move on. There's a metaphor that I use all the time. Did you hear this part, or I don't want to say it again if you heard it? Cool. I just move on. How critical is cybersecurity staffing in healthcare? Kevin, why don't you start?
Certainly, lots of challenges. I think anyone trying to hire cybersecurity people are, running into the well-known fact of, having far more, cybersecurity job openings than there are people who can fulfill those, right? So it is challenging to, find people, to retain people. We here we invest in our people. We provide training opportunities and things to keep them engaged, keep them growing, support their careers in many different avenues to really, keep that to keep the staff engaged and happy in their current role. Healthcare is stressful. It's you feel the weight of that responsibility, right? To protect our patients and the organization 24/7. We never close, right? And so, finding people who, can sort of live and breathe that mentality, that are willing to, do what it takes to keep healthcare operating. And on top of the shortage of people out there to fill these roles, makes it certainly a challenge at times. We've seen a lot of improvement in retention here with our group. So I think we're doing a lot of things right, to keep employees engaged and happy in their roles, and seeing their growth has been really rewarding over the past 5 years. But I think, talking to people at other hospitals, certainly a lot of hospitals are challenged to try to find talent and retain talent in this space. Probably more so compared to some other industries, like financial industries and things. It's, other hospitals, or hospitals in general, certainly struggle to keep and hire people in this space.
What do you think about that, Conan?
Yeah, so getting the resource is definitely a challenge, right? Because while I also take care of the services, I understand how difficult it is. Like, even if in the global market, getting a right resource is a big challenge. But that doesn't, but there is no excuse for you to say that, hey, you know what, I don't have a resource. Let me do the vulnerability scanning after 2 years. Or there is no way you can tell, I will take care of the complaints, like, after 1 year. I'll do the risk assessment after 2 years, right? Like, that's not an option here. So what you can do is, number one, do a skill mapping of your existing resources, identify the gaps, and provide them with the adequate training, right? Like, I mean, organize for an external training, make them certified. These are some of the ways, like, that by which, we can start addressing the gaps with your internal resources. At the same time, wherever, if it is not possible to train or to bring your resources up to speed, try to leverage the external, the managed security services providers. So um, these are the ways, that we can address some of the staffing challenges in the healthcare.
Cool. Stephen.
Yeah, and once you have those resources, right, we need to make their day easier so we can keep them, so we can prevent burnout. We know that burnout, from top to bottom and horizontally in healthcare is a big issue right now, right? Whether you're talking about cybersecurity, whether you're talking about, your physicians, all across the board, burnout is a problem. So if we can make their days easier by getting rid of those redundant tasks that they don't like doing, to where they can focus on something that's, maybe working on a higher value task again. I keep going back to that term, but if we can get rid of that rote work so they can do something more fulfilling with their day, then their day is going to be better. Their week's going to be better. It's not going to be such a chore coming into work, and you can have a better retention for these staffing that's so hard to acquire.
And just to add to that point, right? I mean, bringing in tools that has the AI or the automation capabilities. Just to give an example, right? I mean, if you just have a simple SIM tool, bringing in an SOAR capabilities will definitely help to address some or automate some of the incident handling process. That way, you will get some free time from the associates, and they can help them to train and take up some additional task.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Kev-
I would just add to Kanan's point too about upskilling and training additional people. We have a number of people in IT and cybersecurity that are former clinical people, right, who have learned the skills and have jumped into technology or jumped into cybersecurity. And they have a great perspective, right? Because they kind of understand both worlds. If you're strictly a cyber person, you think about firewalls and you think about all the technology and stuff we get to use on a day-to-day basis. But you bring in someone who, let's say, was a nurse before, and now she's sitting in cybersecurity. She really can kind of better understand the impact of changes or impact of changing this system or this control and how it might impact the caregiver. Like a good example is I was talking to a nurse this past weekend, and just had a really was kind of sharing her thoughts about some of our cyber controls, about how if we've blocked websites or blocked functionality, how that's maybe impacted her role in some cases, right? So it's so important to understand that aspect of it. And so people who have kind of moved from that side of the business into an IT or cyber role can be hugely valuable. And they're already kind of committed to the organization and the overall mission of healthcare. They just need the skills and the ability to kind of learn and get into a new area for their career, and they can be hugely successful.
Yep. And I would highlight that the challenge isn't just finding the people. A lot of times it's the technology is the root cause of the challenge, right? Because the people that exist, you put in one technology and then you put in another one, then you put in another one, you learn another one, you learn another one, you learn another one. And people are, how much is enough? Like when do you stop? What capacity? I don't know. Is this a real problem, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it is it definitely can be a challenge. The average caregiver, first of all, so going back to this weekend, I was talking to this nurse at our charity bike ride we had this weekend in Cleveland, and she was asking questions about the phishing program, right? And she's asking, like, are we actually getting attacked? Are we actually, is this actually a risk? Is this actually something they need to be worried about? Because she was talking about how easy it is to get tricked into clicking things, and And we were like, yeah, it is. And we kind of shared some of the stories and shared, some of the numbers and things we see of how real this is, how real these attacks are. And so it's like, just getting to help them understand that this is real, like these are actual risks that are taking place there. Is so important so that they understand why we have to have firewalls and endpoint controls and email blocks and blocking websites and all the things that we have to do. So I think they don't understand the complexity, like why we need all these things, why we need these layers of defense. And at the same time, they don't really understand the risks, and so we're probably not doing enough to kind of connect with the average caregiver and kind of explain why we need this. Why do we need this complexity? And that's I think something probably every company is a challenge. It's a challenge to do that. To get out there and make that connection, so that they understand why. But certainly, yeah, as you grow controls, you grow more points of failure, more points of if there's a performance problem or a service goes down or becomes unavailable, much harder to kind of troubleshoot and understand, okay, was it a control? Was it the machine? Was it a hardware failure? And so, you have to have good reason to have that complexity. And then the caregivers have to understand why we need all this complexity in order to keep the organization safe.
Yep.
And just to add to that a little bit too, Steve, you're talking about, the knowledge of the employee after, an application comes in, an application comes in, an application comes in. As those start stacking up and you start getting that tribal knowledge, then you also fall away and you start creating those silos, right? Processes are oftentimes no longer documented. Then you see all kinds of other bad behavior start, right? They have Post-its on the side of their screen. They have Post-its under their keyboard. I've seen all kinds of stuff over the years, right? And all those are breaches, right? That could be prevented if the systems were better. But as it happens over time, sometimes you don't even know about those things because you're not looking there. So Kevin, to your point, when you had the nurse come into cybersecurity earlier, it gives you a whole different view from the floor that you never even knew before. It wasn't a problem you're even looking at. So it's certainly something that you have to keep track of and you have to be aware of as the systems grow and as you expand.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. What about patient trust and reputation management? So this is a big thing now, like in healthcare, patients not trusting doctors or trusting healthcare in general. How do you deal with this? How do you rebuild patient trust?
See, one thing here is, so let's look at the hospital bed today, right? Any hospital bed today, right? Like, it has at least some 10 to 15 connected devices, and of which 25 to 30%, it's talking to the internet. Clearly what it means is, like, the attack has increased multifold, and due to COVID and because of the remote patient monitoring, there are a lot of the medical devices, like that you use at home. Just for an example, right? Like, being a collar implant or an insulin pump or gastric simulator, pacemakers, and all those, right? It keeps sending data back to the provider, right, for further analysis. So at every given stage, like, today, even the patients are well aware, like, what's going on and what happens, if any of these parameters that get affected. So the best thing to do is, like, how do we enforce and keep reinforcing, saying, like, we have adequate security controls in place so that your data is protected, your healthcare and health information is protected. But at the same time, especially if it is a remote patient monitoring, how are you making sure that we don't cause any harm, right? Like, that's the kind of the confidence that we need to build. Eventually, like, that will give more help in building that trust and reputation, Steve.
Cool. Who's got something to add? Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
like I was mentioning before, I think everyone in healthcare, we feel this weight of, keeping operations going, keeping the trust of our patients. I think we all feel that responsibility. The last thing any of us want is to end up in the news, for the wrong reasons. I think it drives us. It certainly drives me every day thinking about how do we make sure our for my team specifically, how are we protecting our data, how are we protecting our applications, and it's motivated by that need to maintain trust. Kind of speaking at a larger level, our patients come to us at some of the most vulnerable points in their lives. You think about, your own health data. I've been a patient of the Cleveland Clinic my whole life. So all of my health data is sitting there somewhere in our, set of servers and cloud services and things. My family members and everybody else that I know, has their data sitting here. And so it certainly is a motivator. It's certainly something that, we wake up every day thinking about and make sure that we're doing the right thing, to earn the trust and maintain the trust of our patients. So it's a lot. It's something it's big on our minds. It motivates us. We want to make sure we continue to build trust with our patients and make sure that nothing happens.
Cool. Stephen, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that Kevin and Kanan covered that topic very well.
Awesome. Let's get to some audience questions. Here's our panelists, and we'll go through some questions. I've got some. I'm trying to pull them up here. Let's see. What's cyber like at a healthcare organization? Kevin, maybe you can start.
Sure. It's I guess I'd say like it's exciting. Like I just said, it you feel a grave responsibility on your shoulders, for the trust that I mentioned before. It's exciting, and that we're, here at the clinic, we're doing, some really groundbreaking work in terms of how we're applying cybersecurity, to healthcare. It's also, I guess the other word I'd say is kind of never ending, like healthcare doesn't close. We don't close on the weekends and stuff, right? Things, it can be this never ending cycle of things, as well. So, at times crazy, at times, exciting, at all times, you feel that responsibility, to make sure that our systems and information are safe, they're available, and they're, able, to provide, care to our patients and organization.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I feel more a
Yep.
responsibility, right? I mean, that's how I see it, Stephen, right?
Absolutely.
Whatever I do as part of cyber, it has a direct impact on the people, right? What I mean by that is, if any other industry for that matter, right? Like, I mean, any downtime because of cyber incident, it's just like it just affects your production, or like, I mean, it has some financial impact. But impact in the healthcare industry, it has a direct impact on the patients. Let's say if they have a procedure on that day, and if there is a cyber incident, it definitely has a major impact on the people's health. And the more patient monitoring and the more increased usage of medical devices, any attack, it has a direct impact on the patient's life. So I feel that is I'm more responsible than what I was, like, I mean, taking care in the other industry, right? Like, I mean, that's how I.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I mean, as I mentioned, I came from the manufacturing side. I mean, for many manufacturing vendors, the impact is dollars, right? In some parts of industrial control, if it's, wastewater treatment or pharmaceutical production, right, you start to have more of a personal impact, right? if you're not processing water or, energy production, things like that. But coming into healthcare was certainly eye-opening, and the impact and the responsibility is just different, because it's just so close to, family and friends and people.
Mm.
I mean, you go walk around the hospital a little bit and see people in waiting rooms and thinking about all the things they're going through and realizing, wow, my work has this impact, right? And so, I never quite had that same connection, in my former roles.
And security is always important regardless of the industry, right?
Mhm.
But with healthcare, it's special. It's at a different level, right? If we think about it, just comparing it to, financial services, right? If unfortunately my, bank account information got released, that would be awful. If my health information got released, that would be way worse. I think at least, probably 9 out of 10 people would say I would rather my banking information get released than my health information. It's a very, personal topic for us, so it adds additional stress and strain. So it's something that, we certainly have to focus on, add that extra effort into, and make sure we have those additional systems around.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. I think that's what makes it special is it's so personal, right? It involves people. Next question. How do you suggest getting a budget for a project? Conan, maybe you can start.
Okay. Yeah, because I go through this multiple times, right? The first and foremost, the budget approval, you need to come out with a clear cost benefit analysis. By doing this, what benefits you are going to get. Unless if there is no benefit, we just can't recommend or bring in with 100 tools, without realizing the benefit that the organization or any organization is going to benefit out of it. And the second thing is, we also discussed this briefly, on the people related challenges. How is this going to impact your resources who are currently supporting the cyber team? Meaning, let's say if it reduces their time, or if it brings in some kind of an automation. So those are the aspects we definitely need to consider. And the third thing is if there is a downtime, what is going to be the impact, and can we afford to have that kind of an impact? So these are the three main things that we need to consider, in my view.
Awesome. Do a business case. That's how I would sum this up, right? Do a business analysis, and fully prepare for it. I think that. Next question. Are all healthcare providers dealing with the same issues? Kevin, what do you think?
I think very likely yes, to some degree or another. It's still, again, the actors working against this industry, any healthcare records they can get their hands on, they're going after. So I think a lot of healthcare organizations are seeing the same types of attacks, the same types of tactics and techniques, according to our research, and seeing many of the same kinds of challenges. We're all at varying different levels of maturity, though. Some hospitals are able to respond and prevent attacks from happening more so than others. And so, certainly there's a lot of efforts out there to try to help equalize that. I'm part of the Health and Human Services 405D group, where we publish, guidance for hospitals, small, medium, and large, to try and help them, reduce risk and find ways to help all hospitals. So I think very similar attacks, very similar problems, different levels of maturity, different abilities, to detect, respond, and recover to these situations across the industry.
Pretty much the same. And because of the nature of the healthcare, right? Some of the devices, for example, an MRI machine, the typical lifespan is somewhere around 15 years. So, and it works only in Windows 7 or Windows 6. I've still seen Windows XP being used. So that means the vulnerabilities, right? It pretty much same, and that can be exploited. Whether it is a top-notch hospital or even in a remote place. These are some of the challenges that really exist, and you can't just like that, flip a switch and then change it overnight, because it's going to be there. And definitely that's something it's a big challenge for all the healthcare providers today.
And I think when you speak to most healthcare leaders, right, they always speak to this as when, not if, right? So this is something that's going to happen, something that you have to prepare for, and something that you have to work towards to make sure you have the right plans in place for when it does happen.
Stephen, to keep you talking, right? What do you see as the greatest threat to healthcare moving forward?
Well, I think we've probably covered it early on. We didn't speak to it in that way, but staffing, right? We know that that a lot of the current staff are beginning to age up, that they have a lot of the tribal knowledge that we were speaking about, and making sure that we can continue forward and have the resources that we need is going to be a problem. And again, whether, and I'm speaking to this generically, not just around cybersecurity, but healthcare in general, making sure that we get the right talent, that we keep the right talent, that we keep them from burnout. That's probably the biggest issue that we're going to be facing over the next 10 years.
Does everybody agree with that?
Yes, and in
Yeah.
addition, the medical IoT devices, because you also covered briefly, right? I mean, it's increasing day by day, and it's going to be in multiple billions. So wearable medical devices, it's going to increase significantly. Your device is going to communicate your health. You can even take a call whether to call an ambulance or not, right? That's it's already there. So any attack, or let's say, for example, if it is not sending the data that is supposed to, then it's going to have an impact on the patient's life. So that's definitely one key challenge, Steve.
That's a good lead into the next question. The upcoming info is interesting. What should medical device companies do? Should providers carry some of the burden? Maybe you should address this, Kevin. What do you think?
With medical devices specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's already a shared, burden, I think, because, you can have the most secure medical device in the world come to our facility, and if we don't configure the device with its controls, if we don't configure the back end software that's managing it, we can really sort of easily undo the security that a vendor has built into the product. Or if we don't maintain the device over time, right? Like if we don't patch it and things like that, right? Effectively, I always think of security as sort of a radioactive half-life. It's going to degrade over time, right? So if we don't put the care and investment into the device to maintain the level of security, then we're not really making a difference at the end of the day. So I think even today there's very much a shared responsibility between vendors and providers. Vendors have to create a device that's secure out of the box, that's secure by default, that it is secureable. They need to give us the information so that we can install, configure, maintain, and operate it, and ultimately decommission it in a secure way. And then we have to have the resources and knowledge and skills on our side to take ownership of that, take on that responsibility, and execute it throughout the life cycle of that device.
Yep, I agree. It is a shared responsibility, and the metaphor I always use is the OEM comes out with a patch, the owner operator installs the patch. Anyway.
And also have adequate, I mean, on the provider side, in addition to the device vendor, right? Like, I mean, on the provider side, are they investing in additional tools that will keep monitoring the medical devices? What kind of traffic that is, it's communicating? So those aspects definitely needs to be taken care of. And in case if it senses any incident, like, I mean, it should immediately take an automated response. So that is in addition to what Kevin said. Like, I mean, this is something the provider definitely need to invest to make sure their devices are secure.
Awesome. I'll ask the last question that came in and the closing remarks at the same time. Stephen, why don't you start? Oh, the last question is it really that hard to find resources in cyber? Is it really that hard to find resources in cyber?
Trust me, it is.
I think it's hard to find resources in any area, but Kevin, what you're actually hiring in the area. Why don't I send that one over to you?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge to find people, again, who have that interest in healthcare, have the skills and the abilities. And then again, that's where we've had success investing in the people. We've had success in, people who've kind of moved from a different background into a cyber space. But yeah, when you post jobs, it's tough to find qualified candidates. It's tough to find people who can fill these roles, and then also be committed to the mission of healthcare. Because again, I think this is an industry it's harder to work in compared to other industries because of that personal responsibility.
And other thing is, like, I mean, it's not like a programming language like Java or .NET or even mainframe, right? Like, I mean, mainframe pretty much, like, people who worked on mainframe, they worked for 30 years, right? That's not how the case it is in the cybersecurity world. Your threat landscape has completely changed. Threat actors have changed, right? We never heard of ransomware, like, I mean, 10 years before, but today it's one of the biggest challenge. And as of last year, we never thought about, like, I mean, ChatGPT will bring in, so many vulnerabilities in the system, but it is happening, right? So why the staffing challenge comes here is, like, I mean, you have to constantly keep learning. You have to constantly keep understand what's happening, what are the how the threat landscape and the vectors keep changing, and accordingly adapt yourself, learn the new tools, learn the new technology to address this. And that's why it makes it more complex, especially in the cybersecurity space.
Awesome. I think we're out of time, or pretty much out of time. I've got a couple announcements to make, and then we'll shut her down for the day. So events coming up. No HIMSS, Kevin. This is near and dear to you. Kevin's the president of No HIMSS now. I think your fall event is coming up, right?
Yeah, November 2nd, we'll have our fall event. We've got a great agenda focused on healthcare IT, healthcare cybersecurity, AI, a lot of great topics that we have lined up for the fall conference.
Awesome. And the national HIMSS program is in Orlando this year, March 11th and 15th, or next year, March 11th and 15th. And we always participate in AI Med. It's in Orlando this year. Actually, it's in Gaylord Palms, which is in Kissimmee, right next to Orlando. Anyway, it's a great program. If you're in healthcare, if any of the audience is in healthcare, and these are great programs to get involved with. So
also, like, I mean, HIMSS, they have a specific on cybersecurity, right? I mean, that happened last week, 7th and 8th. And
yeah.
So that is also another, event to look for.
And it's worth noting that last year at HIMSS, or this year at HIMSS, I was in the Gav's booth. So that's pretty cool. We've got a lot of activity coming up. So a webinar, today's webinar, another webinar next week with the FDA and BEAR. It's on medical device and the new guidance that the FDA issued around cybersecurity. I'll mention in Cleveland, the local ISS, the Information Security Summit, is coming up. We have like 5 events at it. Monday, we're going to do training. This is an incident response program from ICS for ICS, which is Incident Command System for Industrial Control Systems. But it really applies to healthcare as well, right? So any critical infrastructure really would benefit by going through this. So Monday morning, we're going to do that for 4 hours, an exercise basically. It's like a tabletop basically, but it's formal training. DevSecOps training we're going to do on Tuesday morning. On Thursday morning, we'll have a breakfast briefing, and we'll talk. That's sponsored by ISA, and we're going to talk about IT/OT convergence in that industry. That's pretty much automation related and geared towards automation. On Thursday morning, we also have a program on third-party risk management. We talked about third-party risk being high in healthcare, and I would say it's probably high in all industries, right? So it's important to have a third-party risk program and really manage the risk of your third parties. And on Friday, we have a DevSecOps program. I want to talk a little bit about next week's webinar with the FDA, but I really want to talk about the training that we're doing. It's specific to ISA's standard 62443, and it's the fundamental certification. The training is 2 days long. I think it's during your HIMSS program, Kevin. So I know you won't be in it. But the training is fantastic, and learn all about the 62443 standard. And they're calling this out in medical. The FDA references the standard directly, and it's a really great standard for securing devices and making sure that a device is secure and that you have the proper processes and everything in place. So here's some information on how to sign up for that training. It's November 1st and 2nd. And that's basically it. I think we're out of time. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Had a great discussion with you guys. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Cheers.